Live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the episode of The Chosen Aftershow, episode 8. My name is Lance Marshall. I'm one of the pastors at the First United Methodist Church of Fort Worth. I am here with my colleague, my compatriot, my co-traveler, my fellow television fan, Reverend Dr. Zhenya Gurina-Rodriguez. Zhenya, how are you this evening?
I'm great. Wonderful.
I'm glad you are here. I am glad that you convinced me to not put up a virtual background so that you stopped me from stepping into that level of tackiness. Zhenya, I appreciate it. And more than appreciate it, I am excited because, Zhenya, we have accomplished something.
Yes.
We've
Almost.
both been...
Almost.
We've both found loves of our lives and gotten married. We both have parented children. We've both been ordained. And yet maybe the greatest accomplishment in both of our lives is successfully watching all 8 episodes of season 1 of The Chosen. Zhenya, it is time to celebrate. It's time to reflect. It's time to look back on the last 2 months with gratitude and appreciation for what we have done. Zhenya, it is time to recap not only the last episode, but the entire series so far of The Chosen. Let's begin with the recap. Episode 8, I Am He. The episode opens 2,000 years prior to the events of the show. Jacob welcomes a stranger. The stranger tells Jacob this land will not be kind to their family. Jacob says that his God keeps his promises and will take care of them. His God, El Shaddai, is not confined to carved idols. The stranger says the land is dry and will not support them. At the exact moment, Jacob's sons strike water where they are digging. Back in our main timeline, a woman works by herself at a well. As she labors with her heavy load, you realize she has come far outside of town to gather water. Why? As she arrives back into town, the woman enters a sparse home. Inside, a man named Nariah greets her with insults. She presents him a writ of divorce. He refuses, even though she is living with another man. Apparently, their relationship is complicated, and he treats her with contempt, burning the request, proclaiming that she is his property, and he does not part lightly with his possessions. At dinner with followers and fans, Jesus and others review the events of recent days. The crowd includes Matthew, the former tax collector, who seems to be fitting in. 2 Pharisees stop by, thinking they've heard Jesus' voice. How is it that you eat with tax collectors and sinners, they ask. Go and learn what this means, Jesus says. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners, Jesus says. Matthew's Roman guard Gaius stops by and asks Matthew to turn his back on his new acquaintances and with Jesus. Matthew refuses and instead asks for a favor. At his apartment in Capernaum, Nicodemus speaks with his wife about an upcoming ceremony. They talk about Shabbat, about family, and about connection. The talk turns to Nicodemus's mind back to his hard question at hand. Is God calling him to be a part of a new thing? Is he willing to follow this path wherever it leads? Gaius arrives to see Praetor Quintus. Quintus wants to see more violence and more control over the area. In reviewing affairs, Gaius tells Quintus that Matthew left his post to follow the traveling holy man Jesus, deeply angering Quintus. Back on the road, Jesus and his disciples prepare to travel. Simon shares his concerns for his wife and mother-in-law back at home. He has concerns that weigh heavy on his heart. Nicodemus is back at the synagogue. In conversations with Shmuel, he gets an insight into the student's ego and his antipathy towards Jesus. Shmuel is clear that he is committed to the law. To him, the law is God, and Shmuel is willing to take down anyone who opposes his work. Eden's mother, Dasha, continues to suffer from her illness, and Eden is increasingly upset. Jesus arrives in their home and tells Simon to go sit with Dasha. Jesus speaks with Eden. He knows the cost of Simon's apostleship will also impact her. He sees her and he honors her. Jesus goes to Dasha and with a touch heals her instantly. Immediately better, Dasha is upset that the guests aren't being properly received and begins to set the table, obviously back to feeling like herself. Back in his office, Quintus makes a decree. Religious gatherings in the community are hereby banned, and Jesus of Nazareth is wanted for questioning. Quintus is tired of the disturbances that Jesus creates, and the tensions are rising. As the disciples assemble at their agreed-upon meeting place, Nicodemus is nowhere to be found. There is a gift, though, enough gold for 2 weeks of food and lodging. You came so close, Jesus says to himself. Around a corner, too scared to go, Nicodemus sobs. Ashamed, he does not have the strength or the resolve to follow Jesus. Gaius stops by the house of Matthew's parents. They are shocked to hear of his change of heart. Matthew has indeed left everything behind, and Gaius gives them the keys to Matthew's house. By the way, he says, he's wanted for questioning. If he comes back, it's better I hear of it first, Gaius says. Also, he gives them a dog. On the road, Jesus reveals that they are going through Samaria. It's shorter, but much more dangerous. The disciples are scandalized and confused. Why would Jesus want anything to do with Samaria or Samaritans? As they travel, Jesus sends the disciples into town for food. By himself, he travels to a lonely well outside of the nearest town. The woman from earlier arrives by herself again. Jesus asks her for a drink, even though she is a Samaritan and a woman, which is scandalous in their time. Jesus immediately asks why she is shunned by others. He tells her that everyone who drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water I give will become a spring of water welling up with eternal life. Prove it, she says. Jesus then begins to tell her he knows of her past. He pushes past her barriers and self-hatred to tell her that the time has come where all can encounter the God of spirit and truth wherever they are. I am the Messiah you are looking for, he says, and begins to recite her life story without condemnation. You're the first person I've revealed myself to as the Messiah, he says. I am rejected by others, she says. I know, he says, but not by the Messiah. I'm going to tell everyone, she says. I was counting on it, Jesus replies. Jesus reveals to the disciples that he told the woman who he really is. So it's time, Simon asks. It is, Jesus says. The fields are ripe for harvest, and they begin to walk into town. Episode 8, I am he. It has come, Zhenya. Enough beating around the bush. Enough will he, won't he. The time has come. He is the man, and he is telling people he is here. Season 1 has ended. Zhenya, our first segment, what sticks out? When you think about this, the ultimate episode of the first season, what sticks out to you? What do you remember? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
So I just connected on this very simple level with the characters, like the mother-in-law Dasha. She gets up and she starts like, Jesus, you want some goat cheese? You like goat cheese? Hey, Simon, you want some nectarines? Like, come on, guys, like, what y'all doing? You know, and then like Simon also be like, yeah, I'm worried, like I'm leaving my wife. You know, it's like people are people, and like listening to their stories, like at the same time, you know, part of this show is like to show us how different their world is, and how like that context is just something that we really need to like put effort into understanding. On the other side, like I don't get it. Like this is like not that much change. You know, Jesus, you like goat cheese? I have some goat cheese. You know. So people are people. You know, things change, culture, language, whatever. Things are different, but
yeah, we serve goat cheese.
Yeah,
So,
I like goat cheese.
I wonder if she's got the little knife and the little board that it comes on.
Yeah.
Y'all on Facebook who are watching now, I'd love to hear what sticks out for you when you think back on the episode. What sticks out to you?
Yeah.
I've read that text so many times. It says Jesus heals Simon's mother-in-law, and she gets up and starts serving everybody. And you lose some of it in the text, but I mean, I grew up in the American South, in which like hospitality is another kind of big element to ours. And so the idea that like a bunch of people are in the house and no one has anything to eat or drink, like perfectly makes sense to me. I never thought of like, I never really put myself in that position, but yeah, if all of a sudden I was in a room and there were a whole bunch of guests there, I'd be like, oh my God, you guys, can I get you some Cheez-Its? Like, can I get you something?
No, first question, and who are you?
Yeah, that's a better point. Yeah. Who are you?
Wait,
First question, who are you? Second question, would you like some salsa and some iced tea? Some chips and dip and some iced tea. Yeah, that is, people are people. They want some appetizers. They don't want something to nosh. The thing that sticks out to me that, again, talking about stuff we've seen over and over again in the scripture, and it kind of comes more alive, was the condemnation in the Pharisees when they come across the dinner at Nicodemus's house, right? And
Nicodemus's, Matthew's.
I'm sorry, Matthew's house. Excuse me. When they come across the dinner at Matthew's house, the Pharisees are coming in and they heard Jesus's voice, and they're so they're so critical. They're like the contempt is just dripping from their voices. You would eat with these kind of people, and they look at Mary and they look at Matthew, and they like the condemnation that comes from you just see it in them, right? How much they don't get it. And we forget, maybe if we're fortunate, the idea has been so drilled into us that faithfulness and being a person of God means love and hospitality for others, and particularly for people who don't fit the bill, that you forget what that's replacing. And what it's replacing in their context was this like holiness, righteousness framework at which some people would just be looked at not only as tainted, but tainting, like just being around them. Like you can't even be a good person if you're in the anyway, just like that content that just really stuck out.
Doesn't he even say something like, even saying the things that she does would defile me?
He says that. He absolutely says, I can't even speak across my tongue what she's done. And like, oh, can you imagine how small you would feel if that's how you were being referred to in a place? And yeah, that really sticks out. They really did a strong job of humanizing that tension when they did that. That's what sticks out to me. So the next thing we think about when we go through these episodes is what surprised us. What's something that sticks out, that's surprising, that we didn't expect to see, that's different. I'll tell you what surprised me. This show, I've enjoyed the humor in the show. I haven't laughed out loud a ton of times. This had a laugh out loud moment for me, and it's in the very opening of the show when they've got ultimately Jacob is digging a well, and this is one of the people before this is like Jacob's like pre-Jewish almost, right? This is pre the time in Egypt, and so it's at the very earliest days of understanding who God is and what God's about. And the faithfulness is leading him to follow. And so he stopped. And so he's digging in this area. And he meets this man who's native to this land. He's basically like, you got ripped off by being led here. This land can't support anybody. You're not going to be able to survive your family. And he's saying, my God brought me here. I trust in my God. And the guy asks, who's your God? And that's like a natural question in their context. Yeah. And Jacob says, these are the words he says, he's an invisible God. He makes us travel. One time he broke my hip. He's an invisible God.
That's true. It's in the Bible.
It's exactly right. One time he broke my hip. That's just the funniest way to tell that story. And like, as preachers and Bible teachers, for those of you who aren't familiar, this is a story of in the midst of his travel, Jacob encounters God and wrestles with him and is injured on his hip and holds on to God until he's given a blessing. And and that's the birth of the name Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. I mean, it's this whole Bible story that as preachers and teachers, we spend so much time explaining that story and getting it to make sense. And in this show, Jacob does nothing to try to explain the story at all. He's like, yeah, he makes us travel. He's invisible. And one time he broke my hip. I'm still laughing about that. That's just the funniest way to tell that story. Well, that concludes our sermon. So I loved it. That was so my sense of humor.
Yeah, that was good.
That really surprised me. So that's what surprised me, Zhenya. What surprised you?
So I was surprised that Nicodemus showed up.
Yeah.
In my mind, when Jesus extended an invitation to him on the roof, I thought that's when the decision was made that he's like not gonna follow, and then he cried and Jesus was holding it. So like, to me,
yeah,
that was done. So when I realized that, oh, he showed up, that means that when his wife is talking about the candlesticks and all that, like, he's sitting there, he's actually considering following Jesus on the road and leaving his wife and all of their life. So all of that conversation suddenly like took a whole new meaning to me when I realized that he was there, like he showed up. I mean, it's not, of course, in the Bible, but
Right.
That detail was so surprising. Like, I was just like, wow, I did not see that coming. Like,
yeah, I also thought that tension was past in his story, that at the rooftop, he knew that was never going to be possible. Talking to his wife, he was kind of reflecting on the decision he had already made. Do you think he was even considering like turning around that corner and going even in that moment? Or do you think he just wanted to be close to Jesus one more time, even though he knew he couldn't follow?
I don't know, just the way he cried, like, it's like, it was not, he didn't cry like a person who made the decision a long time ago and lived with it, kind of embraced it.
Yeah.
Yes, this is not probably the perfect that, like, I feel like, you know, and that tension, Jesus is like waiting for him. He's like giving him a few minutes.
You came so close, he says.
Yeah, so I think like it was there, like that's where he made the decision.
Yeah. Alana points out on Facebook that his heartbreak seems so real. Like you could really tell how heartbreaking it was for him to not be able to commit. That there was real pain and loss in that.
Yeah. No, that scene was powerful but surprising, definitely. Like, I did not see that coming.
Yeah, it makes me think too in a way that I haven't before, because Jesus is aware in this telling of the story, which is of course, we'll call it extra biblical. It's not, we don't get this account in the text. It's an imagination of the show creators. But in their imagination, Jesus is aware of Nicodemus's almostness. And I wonder how it feels for Jesus in his ministry to encounter people like the rich young ruler who asks what it is that he needs to do to enter the kingdom of heaven and goes away disappointed and frustrated when he's unable to do so. I wonder, because I can't imagine Jesus feeling anything. My personal imagination, I imagine him feeling a lot of empathy and compassion for them, but also a sense of loss on their behalf. Like they were so close to having what they really looked for. I never really thought about what Jesus felt before when they went away. Yeah. I can't imagine being anything.
Do you remember the words that Jesus said? You came so close. Is that what he says?
That's what I wrote it down in my summary. You came so close, Jesus said to himself.
Okay. We just talked in my Bible study. In Mark chapter 12, Jesus talks to one of the scribes. The name is not mentioned, just as one of the scribes. And that's where they discuss the first commandment. And then the scribe confirms what Jesus says. And Jesus tells him, when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You're not far from the kingdom of God."
Yeah. You just did that in your Bible study?
I think this story, like, it's not Nicodemus, it's some kind of other scribe, but we just read it in my Bible study, and it stuck out to me. Like, Jesus apparently in Mark encountered some scribe that
was so close. Yeah,
was almost there.
That was our devotional reading this morning at 9 o'clock, Zhenya.
No.
Oh, best friends. We're going on the same area. Oh,
we really need to coordinate better what we're reading.
There's only 4 gospels. I mean, we're gonna hit them. We're gonna hit them a lot.
We read a lot of gospels. That's a good thing, right?
That's exactly right. That's all we need. So Steve points out, I love how the whole episode moves inexorably toward the woman at the well. That's where the whole thing's going, and this whole point of God in Christ sees us. We're seen. Yeah. That's this whole thing that's going through. So those are things that surprised us. Sometimes we think there's things that you need to know. There's a little bit extra background that can help you pull some meaning and context out of the episode. A little teaching that can help you better understand what's going on. Zhenya, first off, what do you think would help people that you need to know to better understand the episode?
Okay, so one little detail about Nicodemus providing money for Jesus. Actually, there are these traditions, again, it's not in the Gospels, but they exist, that Nicodemus and also Joseph from Arimathea, the member of the council who buried Jesus, there are these extra biblical traditions that say that these two powerful and wealthy men were some of the supporters of Jesus's ministry. And there is a detail in the Gospel of John, so that's where we actually meet Nicodemus. in the beginning of John, in John 3, Jesus talks with Nicodemus, then he kind of disappears, we never hear anything back. And then in the very end of the Gospel of John, in verse 9, in chapter 19, verse 39, when Jesus dies on the cross and they bury him, Nicodemus is one of the people that buries Jesus, and it says Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloe, weighing about 100 pounds.
Yeah, an extravagant amount.
Yeah, so so they buried Jesus with that mixture of stuff that he brought, and that's a lot. So that, this extra biblical tradition. Then we have this verse in John where Nicodemus in the end shows up and does financially, substantially, like contribute and show his in that way. So there is some weight in that little detail that came up in the show, like that.
Yeah, they're working off some actual biblical.
Yeah. It's not
wealthy.
totally just like imagination. They just thought, oh, that would be a cool idea to throw it in there. So that's one little detail. Another one I kind of wanted to quickly go through this whole conflict between Samaritans and Jews.
Yeah.
Like from what we read in the New Testament and from the show, sorry, like you would think that these are like, they're the biggest enemies. They couldn't have, like, as soon as the disciples heard that they're going through Samaria, there were all kinds of red flags popping up,
Yeah.
I like when Jesus is like, if we are gonna have this Q&A session every time we do something, this is gonna be quite
every time we do something you don't expect. Yeah.
yeah. So I always kind of thought that the Samaritans were just like really bad guys, and Jews are the good guys. In fact, they are. So it's kind of hard to really pinpoint the origin of Samaritans, but most of the things in history point that they are Jews, and this separation started happening before the exile, and definitely after the exile, when Babylonian Jews come back to Jerusalem, it's destroyed, they're trying to rebuild it. There were some Jewish people that stayed there. Not everybody went to Babylon.
Right.
So some of the people that stayed there, hey, our brothers are back, like, let's rebuild Jerusalem. But the people that came from exile pushed them aside, like, no, you're not good enough. Like, you had some questionable marriages that happened, So that is where this group that eventually became Samaritans started to isolate itself. They believe pretty much in the same scripture, except for Samaritans only follow the first 5 books, Torah. Mm-hmm. They think everything else besides the first 5 books of the Bible, everything else does not have the authority. And they did have their temple, which is something that the show tells us. They built it on the Mount Gerizim, and they thought that was the true place where the presence of God was, not the temple in Jerusalem. Again, Jesus and Samaritan woman have that whole thing there going on.
Yep.
But in the fact that what they believe, this is not like some kind of pagan religion versus Judaism. They have the same roots. And I also looked up what they believed about Messiah, because she does like say the word Messiah.
Yeah, she has messianic expectations.
Yeah, so they did believe that somebody, the name for that in Samaritan Judaism is Taheb, somebody is going to show up, and it will be a prophet like Moses, or maybe even resurrected Moses. It's a little complicated. And this person will come back and will be in charge for 40 years, and will bring back and return all of the Israelites back to the true Judaism, which is Samaritan Judaism. And then there will be the resurrection of the dead as well. But then this person will also restore the true worship, the way Moses led people in worship, and then that person dies. So it was, there is an expectation for Messiah, but it's different, definitely, from Jesus and what Jesus reveals to her. So there are some points on which they connect. They talk the same language. Like when she says Messiah, Jesus knows what she's talking about. But some of those things about, the living water that you will never thirst again, like all of those kind of pointers into I'm so much more, so much bigger. It's kind of like eternity. All of that is like way new for her, because that's not the way they expected the great.
In the same way that what we would consider like the mainline Jewish community is having their minds really expanded by what he's talking about.
Yeah. So I just thought that was interesting. That's it.
I think that's one of the key things to understand in this episode, though, because the differences it's such a good example that the differences between the Jewish people and the Samaritan people in their minds are so huge. In their minds, there's massive gulfs between them to the point of real animosity between them. And when we look at it historically through the lens of 2,000 years, we look at them and go like, you've got like a gazillion things more in common than you do different. And
you worship one God, the same God, you follow the same scripture.
You have genealogical heritage in common, not beyond you've endured so many of the same things together, and yet in their mind it's just completely to the point where even going through that area is defiling. Even traveling in their region, let alone being in communication with them or going to their cities or being in relationship with them. That leads me over to the thing that I think you need to know, and that is this concept of like purity and defilement is a really important concept that's been touched on many times throughout the course of the show. But a thing that exists in their religious conception that might not exist in our conception today is this idea of ritual purity, the kind of purity that has to do with being in right relationship with God. And there can be all these things that make you ritually clean or unclean. I keep saying ritually clean or unclean because, of course, it doesn't have to do with literal physical cleanliness or uncleanliness. It has to do with being in right relationship. And there's so many aspects of the Hebrew Bible that outline the characteristics of cleanliness or uncleanliness. And it can have everything to do to what you eat, to menstruation, to all these different aspects of life. And so purity or lack of purity is so important to them, particularly because that can be a gate to whether or not you can participate in temple sacrifice and worship, etc. So when we say things, when they have the Pharisees saying things like, I couldn't even speak the words across my lips of what you've done, that would make me ritually unclean. I couldn't have dinner with sinners, with tax collectors, etc. It would make me ritually unclean. It would separate me from God. And in their context, people who are ritually unclean are often separated from community as well. And so it's worth noting that we saw that in the episode that featured people suffering from skin diseases. It's also incredibly important to realize that the woman at the well would recognize in Jesus someone that she expected that he would find her deeply ritually unclean.
Yeah, she does say that, like, even this jar would be unclean for you.
That's exactly right. And so, and he points out it's not an accident that I'm here. It's not an accident that I'm here. So it has, in so many ways, a self-respecting rabbi wouldn't have talked to a strange woman, let alone a single woman, let alone a Samaritan woman, let alone a Samaritan woman with her sexual history, right? And so
marital history,
excuse me. And so he points out, like, it's not an accident, actually, that I'm like, you're the perfect person for whom to reveal. And it also says a lot about the way that his kingdom is going to be built. If this is the first kind of person and they're telling that gets to experience the good news of the Messiah, communicates a lot. So that concept of ritual cleanliness, uncleanliness, purity, etc., is really key to the show. And when you get a grasp of it, it makes what Jesus is doing so much more powerful. It's communicating things in their context that we can barely even imagine. So that's something that you need to know. That helps pull a little bit more context out. But I want to talk about what the most important people thought, and that is Edwin and Elizabeth, your husband, my wife, who watched this show. I'm curious, what did Edwin think when he watched this episode?
First of all, he said, that was a good one.
Okay.
I'm like, thanks. That's profound, and then, like, once I started kind of poking him some more, the fact that Nicodemus was crying and like sobbing and just breaking there, he's like, that is something that I would never, even after watching the show and following the character of Nicodemus, we kind of talked with him about how there's a lot of extra stuff. He's like, that was like totally unexpected that he would cry.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that was a huge character development.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go, Julie points out that Nicodemus's wife put myrrh on him. Did Nicodemus do that in the episode? Nicodemus's wife put myrrh on Nicodemus?
Yeah, she did. She had that perfume, kind of a green glass thingy, and
hey, there you go. Julie
she also brushed his beard, which at that point Edwin looked at me, is like, well, why can't you do that?
I'm over here by myself, just struggling.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That was a different conversation that we had.
Elizabeth loves the woman at the well. It's one of really impactful story for her. She one of our last churches did actually like a dramatic kind of a spoken word telling of the story, and it was really powerful. So she just has a really strong connection to that story, and so she was excited when she saw that in the beginning, and then she left in the middle of the episode to go be on a Zoom call with her friends. So she was really enjoying the episode, but she had a Zoom hangout with her buddies, so she didn't see how it ended.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, she wanted to know how it ended. And I was like, Jesus told the woman at the well, it's ended. And she was like, yes. So that's what they thought. So speaking of, that's a good transition into nitpicking. Nitpicking is details we have a hard time imagining, details we have questions about. We want to pick some nits. So that's where we really dive in. This is really the Zhenya show. I'm just going to get out of the way. But my nitpick is a small one, but I think is meaningful. So a really key understanding of the woman at the well is that she is getting water from a well outside of town, which communicates to the reader that something has gone wrong between her and other members of the community, because she's either actively being shunned or she's avoiding them or something. But if she's going outside of town to get water at the well, that communicates a lot about the story. So when we watch that episode, that's a huge part of it. I just want to point out, I could not get past how far that well is outside of town.
It was like a mile?
It was like forever. Outside of town is like 50 yards. That's outside of town. It doesn't make any sense. Zhenya, if that well had been there for thousands of years, there would have been development all around it. Like there would have, that's where the town would have started. They wouldn't have started the town and for 2,000 years have been like, let's just walk a mile and then just build a well somewhere else. It was so far, and water is so heavy. There's no way. That well's too far out of town. That was my...
Okay, talking about water too heavy, I was watching her handling those jars, and most of the time they were empty.
You could tell them swinging around. They're empty. You're a good judge of good visual judge of weight. You called shenanigans on the fish too.
Yeah, I lift weights, so I did appreciate her back rack position. I'm like, now you're doing it right. Doing it on one shoulder, no, you're gonna mess everything up there. Back rack position. But yeah, those jars were empty.
Okay.
But they would weigh a ton. I mean, they're huge. They're made out of that clay. By themselves, they're like probably about 10, 15 pounds. Plus, put like several gallons of water in them.
Oh my gosh, it's like 100 pounds.
Yeah, and she just kind of like
going 3 times a day.
Yeah. Okay. Can I go?
It's you.
Please. All right. So I've been waiting actually for this episode since very early on, because I got a spoiler from a Russian friend of mine who, when she found out that I'm watching the show, she was like, can you believe that the mother-in-law has a Russian name? So, and I was like, stop, don't tell me anything, like no spoilers. So finally we got here. So I did a lot of digging about the name Dasha.
Okay.
It is a Russian name. Like it's a very common Russian name. It's a short for Daria. And I've been through Russian baby name websites, Jewish baby name websites. And I think there is a little screw up there.
Okay.
So Dasha is a short for Daria. Daria is a ancient Russian name.
How can it be short for a name when it's the same length as the name?
Well, it's complicated.
Okay, nickname.
I guess like a full name and a nickname. I guess that's
Okay.
what you would say it in English. And it goes back to Persian origins.
Okay.
Probably. That's how far they can trace it. And we do have Persian King Darius in the Bible. So that is kind of the trajectory of that name. There is no way in the world a Jewish girl would get a Persian origin name. So there is another theory that Dasha would be a short name, a short version of a nickname for Hadassah, which is a Jewish name.
Yeah.
And it's actually the Jewish name of Queen Esther. That is her name. It's Hadassah. Esther is her name outside the Jewish community. But once I got to Jewish baby websites where mamas discuss baby names and how to name properly your Jewish baby girl, taking a name Hadassah that is Jewish, and using this Russian colonial influence and turning it into Dasha is like the worst thing that a Jewish mother can do. Do not call your Hadassah Dasha, because that is wrong. That's not the same name. And there was a lot of women that just like pouring out their strong negative feelings about my culture.
Oh no.
Totally deserve it. No.
Zhenya, tell me how you feel. Now we're gonna turn off Facebook. Tell me what you're feeling.
So back to the show. If they were thinking that Dasha is short for the Jewish name Hadassah, which is a Jewish name, that's wrong. And a lot of Jewish mamas would not agree with that. If they were going with Dasha, going from Daria, that's a Persian name. Again, why would the Jewish woman have that name?
It's so funny you bring that up, because in this show, Dasha's a Russian name, and her husband's name is Bubba Joe, and I was like, "Oh, that's a Texas name." So yeah, Bubba Joe. I'm making it up, Zhenya.
Seriously? Okay, I have another nick pick. Can I go with another nick pick?
Yes.
Stop messing with me. I can't read your body language on Zoom that well. I was totally thinking that was a Bubba Joe, and
it is Bubba Joe. Go back and watch the episode.
All right, second nitpick. Jesus is traveling with his disciples, and of course Matthew has his little scroll. Again, apparently everybody could read, and everybody has all kinds of fancy scrolls laying around.
Everyone's just writing and reading every day.
Yeah, and then when Romans wanted to announce something, they just wrote it and put it on the wall, assuming that everybody can read it. No.
Yeah, and he said write it in every language, and they put it up, and it's just in Hebrew, by the way.
Oh, no, they couldn't read it. Anyway, so back to Jesus traveling and Matthew having apparently a map.
He does have a map.
He can say that, south, blah, 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 there is this village, and we actually need to go. And then he even says so many degrees, whatever, southwest. He has this GPS there. So I was just watching it, and I'm like, something's wrong. That just doesn't look right. So I did some research, and maps were so maps in the way that we think about maps were so rare. There was probably half a dozen of them in the ancient world, and they would be in places like the Library of Alexandria. There is no way.
He's just got one.
Even somebody as cool as Matthew to have a map of that place where they were. So, but they didn't just walk around, blindfolded, having no clue where they were going. So what they used in the Roman Empire is they called it itinerarium, which is how itineraries comes from. And it was a list, so no graphics. It's just a list of places and landmarks and kind of approximate distance between them, how to get from one point to another point.
Like when you print off directions from the internet, like
yeah.
okay.
So this village, walk 5 miles. This well, walk another mile. This village, and if you just go through that, then you will end up where you're going. So
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what they would have, but they wouldn't have a map.
Man, Zhenya, you're good. I'm gonna miss this.
They would not even in a fancy little scroll, you know. And then I like it, like Matthew's holding it, and then one of the disciples like grabs it and like can totally like read it, you know, and something Jesus puts
They can all discern the map. Yeah. Oh man. Over on Facebook, Alana points out that she had to carry the water all the way from Poolville to Peaster, which is funny. Back to our Parker County comment. Nancy points out it's all uphill for carrying the water. Good point. Julie reminds me that Jack is a nickname for John, which is a nickname that's not any shorter than the name itself. So
thank you.
Kudos. Yeah. So thank you, Julie, for keeping me honest there. Okay. So I'm even in, again, we go from nitpicking to deep dive. It's like the Zhenya Super Show at this point of the episode. We go from nitpick, we go to deep dive. So I'm going to get mine out of the way. So what I want to point out is really quickly at the beginning of the episode when he's speaking, Jacob points out, they ask, what's your God's name? And he says, El Shaddai. And so he's speaking the name of God in their context, and he doesn't say God. He says the name El Shaddai. And I just want to point out that there are a lot of names for God throughout the entirety of the Bible. And sometimes they can even get a little bit flattened when they're translated into English. Just maybe God or the Lord or something like that. I just want to point out how many different names for God we have in the English language. We call God, we call God Lord, we call God the Father, etc. And so we have all these different kind of words and titles and names for God. So the same thing happens in the Hebrew Bible. El Shaddai is a name that's mentioned. Adonai is another name that's mentioned. Elohim is a name that's written. There's other kind of conjunctions that are built onto those. And then there's something called the scholarly name for it is the Tetragrammaton. You'll see it written out as capital letters YHWH. And my Hebrew Bible professor just kind of pointed out that the people of Israel considered that name to be so holy that they wouldn't speak it. So maybe out of respect, we'll do the same. So Tetragrammaton is how you refer to it, YHWH. You'll hear it pronounced out loud, but out of respect to people who consider it to be unpronounceable, we won't pronounce it. But these are other ways in which that God is referenced throughout the entirety of the Bible. And so things like you're like El Shaddai or Adonai, I mean, you can question what are they talking about? Well, they're saying God. And it gets translated God, God, God over and over again, but there's actually a number of different words that are written in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament that are ultimately referencing towards the God that Jesus calls Father, that we call God. So just wanted to point that out. There's lots of different names for God in the Bible. Yeah, Zhenya.
So in our Bibles, is there a way in the Old Testament when you read that you know it's the, what you call that long name?
Tetragrammaton. That is when it's written Lord, all uppercase.
Yeah, right? Or a little bit bigger letters.
Yeah, you'll see it scripted out Lord, Lord, and so that's kind of the indication that what was in Hebrew was Tetragrammaton, that will be pronounced.
Yeah. My Hebrew professor, Dr. Feldman, would make us say Adonai. Mm-hmm. And we'll be reading, and if we come across it, we would say Adonai. I
think that's common even today when scroll reading in temple, etc. So when they come across the Tetragrammaton, they don't try to pronounce it. They say the word Adonai, which means Lord. And so that's just kind of a little bit of insight into what's actually being written in the Hebrew scrolls. Zhenya, your deep dive.
I have a theory. So this guy Shmuel, he's been he's been the bad guy, but he reveals a little bit more about himself this time, and it kind of got my attention. So again, it's a theory. I may be totally off. I may be wrong. Maybe season 6 comes and I'm like, oops, that was.
Maybe season 6 comes and you realize that you put in a chuppah that is 2,000 years off in its time.
Yeah, and you're like, oops. But there are some things in this character that do connect him with one historical figure. So his name is Shmuel, And then he tells Nicodemus that he has now this deep interest in, pursuing his career and becoming like somebody who is a teacher in Jerusalem, or even more than that. And then he is all into this false prophecy thing. So there was actually a very famous, very well-known religious scholar. His name was Shmuel.
Well, too dark.
He was called Shmuel Hakatan. He, among other things that he did, one of the things that he is known for is this very short prayer. It's called Birkat Haminim. And it's a prayer that Jewish followers of Judaism would recite 3 times a day. And the prayer is actually a curse on a group of people that you could translate it as sectarians, or this kind of something's wrong with them.
Yeah.
So the prayer, like I'll read that just part of it. And for the sectarians, let there be no hope, and may all the evil in an instant be destroyed, and all their enemies be cut down swiftly, and the evil ones uproot and break and destroy the humble soon in our days. So this really strong curse against people who are not true followers of Judaism.
Yeah.
And very strong historical evidence. It's not 100% proof, like we don't know, but a lot of people wonder if this curse was written against Jews who started following Jesus.
Yeah.
There was a long period of time where there was no 2 religions. It was all Judaism, but some Jews were following Jesus. And so if my theory is correct, and that is where the show is going with this character, that they're building him up to become this Shmuel Hakatan, they are probably around 100 years off. Because
Zhenya, it was going so good.
No. Yeah, it's again hard to point out, like we don't know exactly, but like everything shows he was probably like a 2nd century guy.
Okay.
So maybe my theory is wrong, but there is some coincidence there. Like his name is Shmuel, and now he's talking about becoming a big teacher, and he has this whole thing about
false prophets.
So there are some connections there. So if that's where the show is going, they're a little bit off time-wise.
Now I'm just imagining, Zhenya, what is it your entire life as an academic and a pastor and a teacher, and the one part of your work that survives is here's a curse she wrote against people who she doesn't like.
And then that everybody needs to recite it 3 times a day.
How harsh it is. Yeah, that was Dr. Z. That was her big 2,000 years later. Okay. So excellent deep dive. One of the things we're always looking for, Zhenya, is what can we take out of this show that resonates with us? What can we proclaim as good news to the world? What will preach? Zhenya, when you think about this episode, what'll preach?
Ooh, Jesus waiting for us. Jesus gets first to the well, sits there in the heat, just waiting.
Yeah.
When the woman shows up, she has no idea. And he tells you, I came here to meet you. But the fact that he was actually even waiting for her. And then that whole theme of waiting also when he comes to Simon's house and Eden is like, oh, Jesus, I didn't expect you. And he says, most people don't. It's this kind of humble, so loving nature of God that I'm willing to sit here and wait for you.
Yeah.
I will come and be with you when you least expect it. That just spoke to me.
That'll preach. Yeah, they did give a lot of good lines to Jesus in this show.
Well, it's a Jesus show.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't mean they do a good job writing. I mean, it's hard to write for Jesus. I mean, it's tough. It's the thing that preaches for me is Nicodemus and the idea of he can't he can't go. It costs him too much.
Mm-hmm.
A life of discipleship costs too much. A life of discipleship is too heavy for him. And everyone, we don't think about it today, but discipleship costs us a lot. It can cost, if you've got a group of friends that don't look on faith positively, then all of a sudden you become an outcast in that group of friends. If it's going to challenge the way you think about yourself, about relationships, about money, about success, about pride, prestige, etc. And for some people, that cost is just too high, and they just can't make it. And real, actual discipleship is too much, and they, if they even thought about it, they go away. They go away empty, and if they realize what they were missing, they might go away sobbing. So the idea of what it costs and what are you willing to lose to get something better, really resonates with me. So that's when we think about what we'll preach. What about a wow moment, Zhenya? When you look at this and think, what makes you just think wow from that episode? Anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, the way Jesus handled the age-old conflict between Jews and Samaritans. He just did boom, boom on both sides. Disciples all like, oh no, we're not going there. I mean, takes him 30 seconds. I think one of the things was after they listed all the bad things that Samaritans did, they're like, and none of you were there.
Yeah.
And then, when all kinds of opposition and this negativity comes from the woman, he just breaks through those walls so quickly. It takes us, centuries to build up the walls against our neighbors. We just show, no, you are not like me. I don't like you. And then he just comes and it's like, this whole thing is just shattered. And it's just
he pulls those walls down in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wow moment is thinking about that the very beginning, just the idea of this won't sustain you. There's no water here. You can't live.
Yeah.
And the idea that and then you're literally saying this won't work. And because you were sent here there by God, you were doing God's work, you were doing God's will. The water that you need is there for you. And I think so often we don't experience miracles because we just don't live in need of a miracle. A lot of times we're not living out on the edge where we're following God and just relying on God to provide. And so sometimes it's literally like the water coming up the ground where no one thought was possible. It just makes you go, wow. Zhenya, that is episode 8. That is the first season. That is the conclusion of The Chosen. Zhenya, I gotta be honest. This was my idea. I asked you to do this with me. You watched the show. What do you think? Is it a good show? Is it worth?
I mean, I like it. I bought the DVDs. I'm supporting the second season.
I am too. I liked it. I've never, Christian media is something that I don't know. Sometimes I'm extra critical of, obviously, and nitpicky of, but I enjoyed it too. And I'm so thankful that I got to watch it with a friend and got to talk about it. I'm thankful to all of you who watched it with us. We want to do more of this. So we're going to wait a couple weeks, but we want you to go find Noah, the recent movie starring Russell Crowe. It's a handful of years old. We're going to find out where you can watch it. Keep an eye up on the emails, and we're going to schedule a time. We'll do that Noah in one episode. So we'll just do one episode like this where we recap Noah and talk about it and share with us your ideas of other things we can watch after that. Let's let the framework be that it can be something that's based on biblical stories. And so rather than just Christian inspired, it can actually be kind of a recreating of some of the biblical narrative. That can be kind of the guide work for what we select. So yes, Zhenya.
Let's not put the limit on we will do it in one time. Let's just say 1 or 2 times. Because I watched the movie and I think there is a lot there.
Oh, you might have 2 episodes worth of content about that?
Yeah. Well, maybe. Right. Let's just see.
Let's just see where it goes. We have a 4-hour recap episode. So anyway, this was a blast. I appreciate y'all hanging with us. Thank you for watching the show. Want to hear your comments in the video. What was it that you loved? What was it that made you say, wow, what do you think we'll preach? I'm thankful that you watched the show. I'm thankful that you journeyed with us. God bless you. We love you. And we'll see you all